since we're talking about critical thinking and then creative thinking, so it's all about thinking, branches in philosophy can be best understood if we're going to introduce the knower, the one who thinks, and then the known. So to illustrate that, it's gonna be like this: the knower, and then let's say for example the ball, the known. This is your subject, and then this is your object, right? So again, we're talking about critical thinking and then creative thinking, which requires thinking. So in order to incorporate those thoughts in the branches in philosophy, this is best understood by illustrating this one: the knower, which is the subject, and then the known, which is the object. So dito sa mga branches sa philosophy na to, sa siyam na to, makikita natin we're going to witness the relationship between the knower and then the known. Metaphysics here, andun pa rin yung participation of the knower. Metaphysics, meta here, what is derived from the Greek word meta itself, which suggests something that is beyond the physical world. Physics nandun. So metaphysics is a branch of philosophy which is divided into two. This branch of philosophy, dalawa, something which pertains or which examines the things that are beyond the physical world. So may kakayanan ba? Is it possible for the knower, since yung knower, we are conditioned by our senses, our five senses, to understand the known, to understand the world, we are very much conditioned by the senses. Ang tinatanong na metaphysics, is it possible for the knowing subject to know the known without relying itself to the senses? Kasi it's something which examines the world, the physical world, beyond its properties. So ibig sabihin, inaalam ng metaphysics yung object niya without relying dun sa physical properties ng physical world. That's why it's called something beyond the physical world. That's metaphysics. Ang epistemology naman examines the behavior of our knowing capabilities. Hanggang saan yung kakayanan natin mag-isip. Ang ethics naman is to examine the correctness or wrongness ng actions natin. Kasi if we're going to know something, it requires also actions. So dito sa ethics, ethics or morality, it more tackles our actions. Actions which are derived from our knowing capacity. Tama ba o mali ang actions na ginawa natin? Ang logic naman yung constructions ng statements na ginawa ng knowing subject. So ito yung i-discuss natin sa course natin, the logic. So it's more on constructing the arguments, the premises, the relationship of the subject and then the premise. Yung mga premises na ginawa ba ng knowing subject to describe the known object, to describe the objective world. Is it something valid or factual? Does this describe reality as a whole? So in other words, ang logic tackles more the construction of our arguments, tackles more the construction of our statements made by the knowing subject. Ang aesthetics naman, ang keyword for aesthetics is beauty. So andun pa rin yung known. When the knowing subject attempts to describe and examine the known world or the objective world, hanggang saan yung limit ng order o hanggang saan yung limit ng beauty. Pag ang isang bagay ba walang order, is it still considered aesthetic? Is it still considered something beautiful? So those are ang keyword natin for aesthetics, beauty. For theodicy, andun pa rin the knower and then the known. Ang inaalam naman ng knower dito, theo, ang English word which can we associate dito sa word na theo is God. So this is something different with theology. Ang theology kasi, it examines the nature of God based on the doctrines, based on the Bible. Dito kasi sa theodicy, we try to examine the nature of God without not in reference with the Bible. We're just using reason. So nandun pa rin yung knower. The knower tries to examine the entity, something supernatural, the nature of God. Tapos, it tries to reconcile the existence of a good being which can be found in the nature of God. Tapos, inaalam niya ngayon ang existence ng kasamaan, ng evil. That's theodicy. For psychology, ang keyword for psychology is psyche or the mental states. Yung behavior ng mental activities natin. If I'm so depressed, if I'm very anxious, would this be a problem with to the knowing subject? If the knowing subject tries to examine the known object, pag for example, those individuals who are experiencing delusions, yung may mga naririnig na boses, are they still intact with reality? So nandun pa rin, knowing, the knower, andun yung thoughts, yung creative thinking, critical thinking, the knower, and then the known world. Ontology pertains to letter E. Ang keyword natin dyan is existence. So how does something exist? Does existence fully dependent dun sa known object? Can something still exist without its dependency with the known subject? Anong ibig sabihin nito? Meron tayong known object, yung bola. Nag-exist ba siya dahil sa known subject or kaya niyang mag-exist kahit walang umaalam sa kanya? Or they are mutually interconnected. The ball cannot exist without the knower, and then the knower cannot know itself as a subject without the object. So ang keyword lang ng ontology here is about existence. And then the cosmology here, cosmos, pertains to the universe. So nandun pa rin yung knower at saka anong inaalam niya ngayon. Ang inaalam niya na ngayon, yung universe. Anong inaalam natin sa universe? Inaalam natin yung nature ng universe at yung causality ng universe. So ibig sabihin, yung universe as the known object, inaalam pa rin niya anong kinalaman ngayon ng universe dito sa known subject. So ito lang yung keywords na kailangan nating tandaan. Meta, beyond, episte, the knowledge, nature of knowledge. Ethics is something connected with the action. Goodness and badness of an action. Logic, arguments. Aesthetics, beauty, theodicy, evil, and God. Psychology, mental states. Ontology, something about existence. Cosmology, something about the universe. So let's discuss metaphysics. So metaphysics, and again, andun yung meta, which means beyond the physical properties of the physical world. Wag natin kalimutan parate yung subject, the knower, and then the object, the known. So yung subject, inaalam niya yung known. Ang malaking problema for metaphysics is this one, what is real? Ang problema with the attempt of the subject to know the known object is we are very much conditioned with our perceptions. So in our attempt to examine what is real, ano ba ang katotohanan? How do we define real? Sabi dito. This line is in connection with the movie Matrix. Matrix would closely discuss the metaphysics branch of philosophy. So how do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, ito yun, this is in reference with this perception. What you can smell, what you can taste, what you can see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain. So if you try to limit down real or reality, yung katotohanan, dito lang sa 5 perceptions natin, sa 5 senses natin. Ibig ba sabihin nun, yun ba ang reality? Yun ba ang katotohanan? Ang problema, according to metaphysics, the problem with these perceptions is they try to fool us. They try to deceive us. So these deceptions, this fooling made by our senses, hindi na siya nagiging reliable kasi nga madalas niloloko tayo ng senses natin. So makikita nyo to dun sa test your brain about perceptions. It's very hard for us now to distinguish which one is real because we are very much conditioned by our senses. So in that case, paano natin ngayon malalaman ang katotohanan? So metaphysics pertains now to the non-physical properties of objects. Why? Kasi if we try to stick with the physical properties of objects, we are talking about our senses. Ang problema nga sa senses natin, they are not reliable kasi they always fool us. They are deceptive. Example of which na napanood natin dun sa test your brain sa perceptions are illusions. We encounter illusions experienced by our senses. So if that's the case, we must go beyond the physical properties of our sense perceptions in order for us to achieve the realness in our objective world. Para daw natin malaman ng katotohanan ang real sa hindi real, kailangan natin mag-go beyond sa physical properties ng objects. Ang tawag doon, these are unobservable experience of the mind. Now, ang tanong, ano ba yung tinutukoy na to na non-physical properties of objects? So, examine ulit natin yung ibig sabihin ng meta. Meta means something that goes beyond. Yan, beyond. That's the reason why we have the metamorphosis. If you're watching Power Rangers, nandun yung word na metamorphosis. And other similar sitcoms na kagaya ng Power Rangers. So, metamorphosis, ibig sabihin nun binago. Binago yung metaphysics, something that changes the physical properties of our physical world. So, yun ang tinutukoy ng metaphysics. So, kailangan nating mag-go beyond sa physical properties ng physical world natin in order for us to understand what reality is. Ang problema sa reality natin, we accept the reality. This is in reference dun sa movie na pinanood natin sa Truman Show. The Truman encountered the same problem with the physical world. The physical world tends to fool us. So if the physical world tends to fool us, there are instances wherein we experience deceptions by our physical world. It's time for us to go beyond the physical properties in order for us to realize what real means. So we accept the reality of the world with which we are presented. So ibig sabihin, tanggap lang tayo ng tanggap. Ganun lang daw ang realidad. Ang ginawa ni Truman started to doubt. Nagduda siya na something hindi consistent dito sa physical world. He wanted to achieve certainty, para malaman niya kung ano ang totoo sa hindi. So para malaman mo ang realidad, kailangan mo muna magduda. Otherwise, kung hindi ka magdududa, tatanggapin mo na lang lahat ng binibigay sa'yo ng reality, kahit na yung reality ay niloloko ka. So that's the problem with our mind. Sometimes there are instances that we experience in the objective world. Tinatanggap-tanggap na lang natin, eventually nalalaman natin na mali pala iyon. Kung mali pala iyon, is it still possible for us to achieve certitude? For us to, at least under philosophy, experience contentment. Otherwise, kung hindi tayo makukontento, mahirap mabuhay ng meaningful life. So there are things, according to metaphysics, there are things that are not actually presented by the world. There are things that go beyond the physical world. Like, if you're going to examine what happened to Ant-Man, he went beyond the usual physical world of a human being, to the point that he went to the subatomic world na hindi na kayang i-perceive ng five senses natin. Nang hindi mo na makikita to ng bare eyes mo. Malalaman mo lang to if you go beyond the physical properties. So, ang tanong, are there worlds? May mga mundo ba? May mga realm ba? May mga realm ba outside our usual physical world? Meron tayong mundo ng mga bacteria, meron tayong mundo ng mga viruses, meron tayong mga mundo ng subatomic particles. And this is something beyond the limitation of our five senses. So ibig sabihin, meron palang realidad outside our usual objective world. This is proven dahil nga meron tayong bacteria, meron tayong viruses, ito yung pinrove ngayon ni Ant-Man. Other than the subatomic world, meron pa bang ibang realms? Yun ang gustong malaman ngayon ng metaphysics. Kasi we cannot simply limit our knowledge Hindi natin pwedeng ilimit yung knowledge natin dito lang sa physical world. Dapat, let's try to examine other realms kung meron man. Kasi if we try to limit our own knowledge, our type of thinking, dito lang sa mundo natin, hindi natin kayang ma-discover yung mundo ng bacteria, yung mundo ng viruses, at kung ano-ano pang mundo. So there's a difference between, because of metaphysics, through the help of science, we're able to distinguish the difference between bacteria and then viruses. Ang bacteria pala, living, non-living. Kayang i-treat na antibiotic ang bacteria, pero ang virus tulad ng COVID hindi kaya. Ang infection is localized, so ibig sabihin pag meron kang tonsillitis, localized lang yung area na infected niyan, dito lang sa may bandang throat. Ang problema sa virus, it's systemic, ibig sabihin buong katawan. Kaya niyang i-infect. Some bacteria are beneficial, viruses as a whole, they are not beneficial. Tapos, ang reproduction nito, ang bacteria, nag-i-split lang into two. Mas larger ang size ng bacteria. Ang virus, ini-invade niya yung isang host cell. Tapos, sobrang liit ng viruses. So, this was discovered because of metaphysics through the help of science. Now, other than the subatomic universe, meron pa ba tayo? That's the question of metaphysics. Now, metaphysics tries to eliminate materialism. Materialism, ibig sabihin, nandun yung word na material. Ang ibig sabihin ng material, it's something physical. Kung something physical yan, it's restricted sa senses natin. So, ibig sabihin, yung kaalaman lang natin ay limited lang sa senses natin, sa material na mundo, sa physical na mundo. Ang problema nito, they tend to be illusory, they tend to fool us. So beliefs, desires, thoughts, love, and pain are only words. These mental phenomena don't actually exist. You don't have to believe it or think about it. Ito yung problema under metaphysics. The beliefs, the desires, the thoughts, the love, and pain, which are created by our words because of our experience dun sa physical world. We try to create words like this. These are mental phenomena that don't actually exist. You don't have to believe it or think about it. The reason why they don't actually exist is because they are thoughts that were derived, especially pain, they are thoughts that were derived from the physical world. They don't actually exist if you going to use metaphysics, kasi nga dependent siya dito sa physical world. Ang totoo lang daw, those things that exist for the metaphysics are those things that are outside the physical world. So if you experience pain, if we're going to be technical, yes, it exists. Pero if we're going to use metaphysics, it's something not real. The reason why it's something that it's still existing, nandun siya kasi naramdaman ng senses natin. Ang problema for metaphysics, it tries to deny the existence of some of those ideas that are being brought about by our senses. Dinideny niya yung realidad na natatanggap ng senses natin. Kasi parang for metaphysics, hindi niya dapat to pinaglalaanan ng sapat na panahon kasi may mga bagay pa na mas mahalaga na ideas na kayang i-produce ng thoughts natin na hindi siya dependent sa senses natin. So yun yung problema with metaphysics. Ayaw niya ang materialism. Ayaw niya yung mga ideas na napoproduce ng senses natin. So metaphysics problem, let's check this slide. The problem under metaphysics is the physical form. It's inconsistent, it's unreliable, and deceptive. So if you are too much dependent sa advertisements, which is perceived by your sense of sight, tapos nire-relay ng sense of sight mo sa utak mo na itong Burger King Whopper ay masarap, ganito ang reality niya. Pero if you're going to order this burger sa restaurant, magugulat ka, ito yung actual burger na ibibigay sa'yo. Ang tanong, which one is the actual product? Which one is the real product? Is it product A or product B? Alin ngayon ang totoo? Ito yung nakikita natin sa ads, which we thought are actually real. Pero yung pagbibigay sa'yo, ito letter B. So alin ngayon ang totoo? Product A or product B? merong inconsistencies binibigay sa atin ang physical world. That's why if we rely too much on this information, we are being deceived. For metaphysics, wala to. Dapat hindi natin bigyan paglaanan ng sapat na panahon. Meron ng problema nangyayari between appearance and then reality. Appearance of Jennifer Lopez without the makeup and Jennifer Lopez with the makeup. So alin dito ang real Jennifer Lopez? Without the makeup or with the makeup? It is difficult to realize the nature of truth in the physical realm. That's why for metaphysics, we have to go beyond the physical realm to understand reality. That's the objective of metaphysics. Ang problema sa physical world, binibigyan tayo ng false evidence na akala natin ay totoo. Ang tandaan lang natin na binigay kong example dito is the burger. So the problem with the appearance, it's only focused on the surface. Tapos yung focus niya sa source, nagkakaroon ng changing dun sa image. Appearance of real is the result of our education. The problem with this kind of education, binibigay sa atin ngayon yung education na to, na yung truth na nakukuha natin sa education na to is the real. Yung truth na nakukuha natin with the condition and education, we assume is actually real. Yun yung problema na gustong isolve ng metaphysics. An example of conditioned learning is this behavioral learning, these three types of behavioral learning under psychology. So we have classical conditioning, we have operant conditioning, we have observational learning. So again, if we're talking about learning, gusto mong malaman ngayon ang katotohanan. That's the reason why you're learning. So what's classical conditioning? It's defined here a neutral stimulus. So ibig sabihin merong stimulus na i-stimulate yung sense of hearing mo because of the whistle. It's associated with a natural response. So ibig sabihin the dog was conditioned that every time he hears the sound of the whistle, he tries to associate that with a specific response. So pag may narinig kang pito, ang association mo nun is may pagkain. So ganun ba ang ibig sabihin na truth na binibigay dito? Pag may nagpito pa, ibig ba sabihin nun, does it simply imply that there's actually a food? That's classical conditioning. Another thing is operant conditioning. So tingnan natin yung nature ng katotohanan dito para makontento tayo kasi we're talking about philosophy. Operant conditioning is a response is increased or decreased due to reinforcement or punishment. In this case, we're talking about reinforcements. Kasi every time that the mouse accidentally pulls the lever here, may lumalabas na reward. So every time na hindi niya to pinupull, merong punishment, walang lumalabas na pagkain. So yung ba ang katotohanan? Yung ba ang katotohanan na binibigay ng lever? What kind of truth is being given by this pulling of lever? Binibigyan ba tayo ng sufficient description and definition about the truth for us to achieve contentment in life with this kind of learning? So ganito rin daw ang binibigay sa atin sa eskwelahan. Classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and then next is observational learning. Now, you can associate the Bloom's taxonomy here. For instance, if may mga kapatid kayo mga bata sa preschool, pag tama yung sagot ng student, that's operant conditioning. Ang ginagawa ng teachers, binibigyan siya ng star. To the point that the learner is too much dependent na sa award system. Pag hindi siya nakakuha ng award, merong corresponding behavior na nafu-for. That's the problem that metaphysics wanted to resolve. Next is observational learning. When we say observational learning here, learning occurs through observation and imitation of others. Ginagaya ng bata. This is again in reference dun sa psychomotor skills that we've discussed under one of the three domains of Bloom's taxonomy. So yung basic level of psychomotor skill is imitation. When we learn through imitation, observational learning, do we actually realize and recognize the truth about the world? So for metaphysics, these types of conditioned learning, ang problema with our senses. To the point na sobrang na-condition tayo sa type of learning na to, sobrang na-condition tayo sa type of education na to, hindi na natin nakikita yung tunay na ibig sabihin ng truth. So yun yung naranasan ngayon ni Truman dun sa Truman Show. Since birth, he was conditioned to be an actor without realizing that he was actually an actor. Hindi niya alam yun na yung mga kasama niya are actors. Tapos dinideny sa kanya yung katotohanan na yun for him to be conditioned with other experiences. So hindi yun yung problem with metaphysics. For metaphysics, the process being employed by metaphysics in its attempt to unravel and discover the truth is abstraction. So we are going to use abstraction as well if we discuss language in logic. Ang keyword lang for you to easily understand abstraction is it's an act of separation. So anong paghihiwalayin mo? You separate things that are essential and things that are not essential. Since we're talking about metaphysics, the thing that is not essential here are those ideas formed based from the senses. So yung mga data na natatanggap natin sa senses natin, na binibigay ng senses natin sa utak natin, these are not essential kasi they tend to deceive us. So what is essential now is we try to separate those ideas from ideas that are independent from the senses. Kasi for metaphysics, this essential is the thing that we consider as real. This real now can somewhat bring us to the truth. So ito yung ginawa ni Truman dun sa palabas niya. Iniwalay niya ngayon yung conditioned learning kasi he doubted something. So yung real under metaphysics is something now consistent and it does not change. If it's something consistent and it does not change, hindi na siya nagbabago, therefore pwede na natin siyang, it's something now reliable. If it's reliable, hindi na natin siya pagdududahan. So again, metaphysics uses abstraction to achieve and unravel the truth in reality. In order to achieve certitude or certainty in reality, pag na-achieve mo na yung certainty, hindi ka na magdududa kasi nga consistent na yung nararanasan mo. So what are those instances in which metaphysics can actually say that something that it experiences is actually certain? Ano-ano ba yung mga bagay na yun? So, kahit anong bagay na yun, insofar that it's independent from the ideas of the senses, those things can be considered as product of metaphysics. Example of which, pwede natin i-connect dito yung theodicy. Theodicy which examines the nature of God despite the idea of evil. So, yung metaphysics idea ni God is somewhat independent of the senses. Bakit hindi natin nakikita ang Diyos? Hindi ako naniniwala sa Diyos kasi ang Diyos hindi naman siya nakikita ng mata. So, maniniwala lang ako sa Diyos pag nakikita na siya ng mata ko. Kung sa multo, hindi ka naniniwala dahil hindi mo pa siya nakikita sa mata, ibig ba sabihin nun, hindi ka rin ba maniniwala sa Diyos kasi hindi mo siya nakikita sa mata? Now, the reason why God can't be or cannot be experienced by our sense of sight is because part of His nature as a God is His spirituality. Kasi otherwise, if God can be seen by our naked eyes, hindi na siya spiritual entity. Nagiging physical entity na siya. Ibig sabihin, lahat lang na na-experience ng mata natin, our eyesight, are only physical, are things which has physical properties. So since we cannot see God, it only suggests that God doesn't have any physical properties. Kung wala siyang physical properties, God must be outside our five senses. If God is outside our five senses, therefore, God is a product of metaphysics. Is this something certain or not? It must be something certain kasi we were able to compare the property and nature of God dun sa nature ng mga objects na may physical properties like human beings. We go now to the next branch, which is epistemology. So again, ang keyword natin for metaphysics, andun na mismo yung sagot, meta, beyond the physical world. Kasi ang problema sa physical world, this is only achieved by our five senses. Ang problema sa five senses, they try to fool us. So there must be ideas which can be produced outside the five senses. Pag na-produce na to, ito ay something reliable and something consistent. Thus, we're able to achieve the truth. Ito tayo ngayon sa epistemology. Ang keyword natin for epistemology is something about knowledge. The problem here is it pertains to the validity of our knowledge to know things. Hanggang saan ba yung limit ng aking pag-alam? We have the knower, the subjective knower, at saka yung objective known. Ito yung umaalam at ito yung inaalam. Hanggang saan ba yung reliability na aking pagkaalam? So epistemology here can be reconnected, can be linked with metaphysics. It's a description of reality. Reality as a product of our senses or our ideas alone. Pwede rin siyang maling sa ethics kasi nga it pertains to our actions. So example, laissez-faire capitalism here, politics, laissez-faire capitalism, ibig sabihin ng laissez-faire, free for all, malayang kapitalismo. Kung malayang kapitalismo, walang pangingialam ng gobyerno. Kaya siya under ethics kasi merong actions dito sa kapitalismo. May act. So ibig sabihin, if we try to deny the intervention of the government in capitalism, is it something reliable? It's connected with metaphysics kasi it's a conflict between our ideas, which are these ideas are free from the senses, and then meron tayong nilalabanan din na ideas which are product of the five senses. So alin ngayon ang mas reliable na knowledge, yung metaphysics o yung knowledge given to us by our five senses? So ito yung nag-evaluate ngayon. Meron akong inaalam ngayon. I am able to acquire information from the objective world. Nung pumunta ako sa palengke, naglalakad ako sa palengke at bigla akong tinawag ng tindera doon. Anong hanap mo, Pogi? So tinawag akong Pogi ng objective world ng palengke. Gaano ka-reliable ngayon na Pogi talaga ako? So yun yung problema ngayon ng epistemology. Gaano katotoo na Pogi ako? Anong valid source ko na masasabi ko na pogi talaga ako? Kung yung pinanggalingan ng kapogian ko ay galing lang sa mga tindera sa palengke. Nagsasabi ba sila ng katotohanan? O sadyang may ibang motibo sila? So yun yung ibig sabihin ng epistemology. Epistemology, similar with metaphysics, is also after the truth. Kasi the product, kung if we're going to examine the content of our mind, ito yung utak natin, dapat yung content, which is epistemology, the knowledge, that's epistemology. Yung laman ng utak natin, that's knowledge. Yung knowledge natin should acquire the truth. Is it possible for our mind, for our knowledge, to experience absolute truth? Ibig sabihin ng absolute truth, walang kaduda-duda na totoo to sa lahat ng pagkakataon. That's absolute or relative. When I say relative, may mga pagkakataon na yung katotohanan na na-experience natin ay pwede palang mabago. Sabi ni Rene Descartes, was never to accept a thing as true. Hindi mo pwedeng tanggapin ng isang bagay na totoo until you knew it's such without a single doubt. So nandun pa rin pagdududa. Malalaman mo lang na ang isang bagay ay totoo kung hindi na to, kung wala nang bahid to ng pagdududa. So is it something absolute? O yung pagdududa mo is something relative? When I say relative, it varies from time to time. Etong absolute, hindi na ito mag-vary. Kasi nga, narating nyo na yung end. Narating nyo na yung kasiguraduhan na wala na siyang kaduda-duda. That's something absolute. Ang relative po, hanggang may duda, that's relative. A type of of epistemology is empiricism.